Hello plebeian viewers, and welcome to Crit Day, a new video essay series where I do deep dives into the lives and works of artists that you love or maybe that you've never even heard of, and I relay the information back to you. Today's subject is one of my favorite artists of all time, and that is Jean-Michel Basquiat. Basquiat was a prolific painter through the late 70s and throughout the 80s who rose through the ranks and created art alongside those of Andy Warhol, Keith Haring, one of my personal favorites, Rammellzee, and many others. So without further ado, let's get into it. Jean-Michel Basquiat was born December 22nd, 1960 in Brooklyn, New York to a Haitian father and Puerto Rican mother. Basquiat was an artistic child, taking in all manners of art. Whether it be museum collections or music, he had a knack for it all. While his inspirations were clear from a young age, drawing things like his own interpretations of his favorite cartoons or even biblical scenes, it was the famed anatomy textbook Gray's Anatomy, not the TV show, like I thought at first, that would go on to become one of his biggest inspirations and last throughout his entire art career. At the age of 7, Basquiat was hit by a car. He suffered massive internal injuries and would eventually go on to need a splenectomy. He spent months in the hospital, and it was quite a turning point in his life. He would later go on to describe the experience as such. My earliest memory is getting hit by a car. I was playing in the street. I was 7 or 8 years old. It seemed very dreamlike. It was just like in the movies where they slow it all down. When a car's it was just like that. I had an operation in my stomach, the whole business. I remember it just being very dreamlike and seeing the car coming at me and then just seeing everything sort of through a red filter. To keep him occupied while he was in the hospital recuperating, his mother brought him a copy of Gray's Anatomy, and this is what would go on to spark a fascination in Basquiat and inspired much of his work. Which is awesome, but an anatomy textbook's kind of a weird gift for a 7-year-old, isn't it? Basquiat's home life became a challenge at around 13 when his mother was committed to a mental institution. She would be in and out of institutions for the rest of her life, and due to her instability and general family dysfunction, Basquiat ran away at 15, but was quickly arrested and returned to his father's care. At 17, he dropped out of his high school and attended an alternative high school in Manhattan, but his father kicked him out of his house indefinitely for being a high school dropout. This would end up being the beginning of Basquiat's art career, as he supported himself by selling t-shirts and homemade postcards while staying with friends in Brooklyn. It was around this time that the notorious Samo was born, as Basquiat and his friend Al Diaz began spray painting graffiti all over Lower Manhattan. Under the Samo moniker, they tagged satirical and bold declarations in the buildings in and around the Soho art scene. But Basquiat and Diaz's friendship faltered at a point, and suddenly Samo is Dead began appearing around Soho. But even though Samo was dead, Basquiat revealed himself as the prominent graffiti artist, and would later go on to leverage that into his own solo art career. Basquiat's work was bold and wildly creative. He pushed his work by selling postcards, showing paintings, performing music, or disc jockeying. He even hunted down his idols and just handed them his work. There's a goofy scene in the biopic on him, just titled Basquiat, where he straight up just approaches Andy Warhol, played by David Bowie, and hands him a postcard. Here, I'm Basquiat. It's kind of weird, but it's what he did. And it worked, because by 21, he was painting full-time. Now that's all about his life, but as I said, by 21, he was painting full-time. So let's get into the art. Basquiat rose to fame alongside incredibly famous artists like Andy Warhol, Keith Haring, and, again, one of my personal favorites, Rammellzee. He was rising to art superstardom, producing work at nearly unfathomable levels. He was a superstar in his craft. He was a celebrity. He even briefly dated some unknown artist named Madonna. Though he unfortunately passed away at just 27 years old, he left us with a lifetime of work. Basquiat produced over 1,500 drawings and another 600 paintings on top of that. And this is just the work that we know about, because some people are still finding it. I found 2 great quotes on his body of work that I'd like to share. The first is by Keith Haring, and he said, "He truly created a lifetime of works in just 10 years. Greedily we wonder what else he might have created, what masterpieces we've been cheated out of by his death. But the fact is he created enough work to intrigue generations to come. Only now will people begin to understand the magnitude of his contribution." The second is by Henry Geldzahler, and he said, "Jean-Michel lived a short life, but he left us with a lot of memorable work, an astonishing amount given the number of his working years. The ancient Greeks believed that lives weren't lived tragically short or satisfyingly long. Rather, they thought each life is lived to its own termination and should be valued by its own terms. One might think of him as a warrior who fell too soon in a battle not of his own making. So let's talk about the work itself. Basquiat's painting method was described to that of a beat writer. He would keep books and references and all sorts of items just kept open in his studio. He would flow through the space and work on multiple paintings at a time. He was constantly creating. He was constantly looking for things to inspire his work. He was constantly looking to do more. Basquiat's work was highly political. He examined marginalized bodies as a reflection of his own culture. But while he celebrated his culture in some ways, he would criticize the ironies of it when he had to. He revealed the complexities of marginalized bodies and was not afraid to call out its ironies or contradictions. So let's talk about the work itself. The first painting that I'm going to talk about is Riding with Death. And it is actually based on a Da Vinci illustration of Envy and Virtue. Now, I love this painting, strictly because it's so Basquiat, but at the same time, it's not. We've got the African-American figure riding atop of the skeleton, sitting atop a bland but poppy background. We don't really know what this painting means. It's a character riding on the symbolism of death. I've heard people talking about death as a horse, but it's quite clearly a human skeleton in the painting, both in the Basquiat and the Da Vinci, so I don't really know where that comes from. I just find this to be a really beautiful painting, and once again, it's not the traditional Basquiat style. So there's a lot to take out of things that are extremely Basquiat, but there's also a lot of things that we can learn from how he painted outside of his typical style. The next painting that we're going to take a look at is, boom, this one, Irony of a Negro Policeman. Now, this painting is much more Basquiat. This is much more his traditional styling, the sort of scribbles, the addition of text, the sort of wonky character that comes together to produce a bold and easy-to-read character. The faces in these paintings are often referred to as examples of what African death masks look like, and this is a reference that he used. This painting goes back into that thing that I talked about earlier, where Basquiat talked a lot about marginalized bodies, but he wasn't afraid to talk about the contradictions or ironies within them. And in the late 70s and throughout the 80s, a lot of people felt, and understandably so, that the police force was seeking to oppress black culture. And Basquiat did not believe that a black man as a cop was serving his race, because he just believed that they were seeking to oppress his race. So it's sort of that call out that we talked about within his own culture. Our third painting is this guy, Two Heads on Gold. And again, we're looking at a very Basquiat-esque painting. This is his style. We see the reference even further to the African death mask. This painting is much more powerful in imagery. It's less deliberate in its exact message, but these characters interacting and the bold colors, the bold lines, creating this sort of performance and back and forth interaction between the two characters is something that is very indicative of Basquiat's paintings. There's not a whole lot of concept to this one. It's just a beautiful image, and it really is a great representation of Basquiat's painting and his painting style. Tired of doing all this talking. The final painting that we're going to talk about is The Biggin. This one, Untitled. This one sold in 2017 for a whopping, a record-shattering $110.5 million. I would take $110.5 for any of my paintings right now. But this painting was unearthed, brought to auction, and it just blew every record out of the water. When it was originally put to auction, it was valued at an already record-shattering $60 million, and it sold for $110 So it shows how sought after Basquiat's work is. This painting, again, is just very indicative of his style. Bold, black characters, powerful, beautiful, and vibrant imagery. Basquiat's work speaks to a generation, and he created so much of it that it speaks to generations to come, and it finds ways to be relevant in so many different cultures and aspects of our lives. We see references of Basquiat all the way up to today in things like hip hop culture, in painting. Obviously, he's still shattering records with some of his work that's being sold. I mean, Basquiat's painting, and this one, record shattering, being a great example, is still a series of work that speaks to generations and generations. In a lot of ways, I wish that I could more eloquently describe Basquiat's work, but there's so much concept behind it, and at the same time, it's just beautiful imagery. And you can really take in a generation-defining painter just by looking at it, not even digging deeper. But if you wanted to dig deeper, one of the best ways to learn about Basquiat is not by his work, but by his actual quotes. And the best collection that I've found of those quotes is by Larry Warsh, and it's actually what inspired this video, and that is the book Basquiatisms. Basquiatisms is a great little book. It's only about $13. It's a cool collection of his quotes about his process, his inspirations, his life, and his art. And Basquiat was a very outspoken person. As I said, he was a celebrity in art. This was a time where art was shifting from just a person who makes a collection of work and the message is all in that work to art and an artist. And sometimes the artist had more to say than the art. And in a person like Basquiat, who had so much work, such a vast collection, saying so much, one of the best ways to gather his overarching message was to look at what he actually said and how he spoke and how he discussed art. And there's a lot of really interesting quotes. The quote about him being hit by a car in the beginning animation is actually from that book. So I think that it's really worth a read, and if you're a Basquiat fan at all, it's definitely worth picking up. I wanted to wrap up this video just by discussing why I chose Basquiat for this first one. And really, it's just because he, and I'm beating a dead horse by saying this so much, really was a generation-defining artist. And he's continued to be relevant and popular and generation-defining almost 30 years after his death. Basquiat, to me, is really just a culmination of all the things that make an amazing artist. He's conceptual and deep, but his imagery doesn't falter because he's trying to be conceptual and deep. He just is as a byproduct of his process, and his process is very deliberate and extreme, and it's reflected in the work. He really took a collection of all the art styles around him, the pop art with the bold colors and imagery and hard lines, and the abstract expressionism with the looseness of stroke and the way that he just kind of mashed things into the canvas. And he had his own style. He really built this style that can't be described any more than Basquiat. To call it expressive or bold or anything else aside from just Basquiat is a disservice to it. And there's not many artists out there like that. He was just incredible. So that's going to wrap it. Jean-Michel Basquiat, truly one of the best artists in the last 100 years. It's undeniable. So thank you for watching the first episode of Crit Day. As I said, this is going to be a twice-a-month series, but hopefully at some point it's going to jump up to once a week. I am Forrest. You can find me on Instagram at ForrestHeinsArt. Follow everything Plebeian at plebeian.us for all of our content. Deli app coming soon. plebeiandeli.art to find out all the information for that. And follow us on Instagram at plebeian_us. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video. Let me know what artists I should do next. And it's Crit Day, so give me a little critique. I'm still learning. I don't quite know how to do this, but I'm happy to try, and I hope that this can just get better and better. Thanks.